Thank you for joining us today for this webinar. My name is Bob. I'm not sure I've had the chance to meet you both yet, but I'm a HR consultant at Robinson Grace, and I'll be taking you through today's topic of flexible working. The idea is to give you some tips, guidance to prepare and educate you on all things flexible working just before the new rules take effect on the 6th of April this year, coming around really quickly. Throughout, if you've got any questions, you should see a chat section at the top of the call. So if you can please pop in the chat any questions that you've got, there'll be an opportunity at the end to get those questions hopefully answered. So before we start, just wanted to give you a bit of a brief overview of us. Like I said, you might already know us already, but I'm Bob. As you can see on the picture, I'm on the right. I've been with the business since November last year. We've got Louise in the middle, struggling with Chester there. She's the owner of the business and our lead HR consultant. And then we have Andrew on the left, HSE consultant. Sue is our client administrator, who you might have spoken to on occasions. She's next to me. And we've also got Debbie on the left as our other HR consultant as well. Robinson Grace was founded in 2011, and the goal was to offer organizations straightforward, no-nonsense HR advice that ticks all the legal boxes and is affordable. We've grown from strength to strength. We've got an established team of 8 qualified practitioners alongside our wellbeing champions, Chester and Harper, the office cockapoos as well. As you can imagine, on days, they can be a bit of a handful, but they do help to brighten up the office. Most of the HR work we do receive is through word of mouth with recommendations from our 100-strong client base. And our clients vary from veterinary IT businesses, dance schools, landscape companies, charities, and we even have a Russian language center in there thrown into the mix as well. But our aim is always to keep HR simple and provide exceptional customer service. So enough about us. Back on the reason why you're here. We're going to cover the important changes to your flexible working process and get you ready for April. So we want to help you understand what's changing and make sure you're able to fly straight in by having all the background and knowledge required to orchestrate a flexible working request. So today we're going to discuss examples of flexible working, the process, key elements, key changes, and give you some legal examples as well. So flexible working requests to work from home have now become a popular option, obviously, since COVID hit back in 2020. And I wanted to touch on a recent employment tribunal that made a decision on a home working case. So this was Wilson versus the Financial Conduct Authority. And it was based around a manager who put in a claim after a refusal to continue working from home after COVID. So interestingly, this went in the employer's favor. The employee was home working permanently since COVID and was asked by their employer to come in 2 days a week, which obviously the employee wasn't happy about. The tribunal decision was quite upfront with their comments about the misgivings of technology, in that a lot of leaders think that technology can't always replace in-person interactions, so being in the office, that social aspect. And this case was particularly interesting for employers, as it gave real assurances that if due to business reasons and objectives, they wanted to insist on people turning into the office following COVID, you do have that maneuverability and reason to enable you to do that. And we're going to touch on that case a little bit later, just in a bit more detail. So I do apologize if this does sound obvious. You might already know the rationale behind flexible working, but just give you a bit of education on it. It's not always obvious to everyone. So flexible working can come in many different forms. So obviously working from home, we've just touched on that. It's a common request, particularly following COVID. We've got reduced days and hours. So probably the most popular request, particularly when nearing retirement or having children, or after having children, I should say. We've got adjusted start and finish times. So this may aid those with children or those with outside commitments in the mornings and the evenings. We've got compressed hours, so working your weekly hours within lesser days. For example, working your weekly hours between Monday to Thursday instead of Monday to Friday. You got your flexi time as well, so working your set hours within agreed limits between, say, 8 and 6 p.m. in the day. And we've also got job sharing as well, which is where two employees share all aspects of a job between them on a pro rata basis. So to give you a bit of history around flexible working, again, you might not know this, but the statutory right to make a request has been in place since 2003, and it has really evolved somewhat over time. So when it originally came into place, it was quite a limited right. It was only for parents with children under the age of 6. Then it changed to 18. Then it changed again to anyone that had caring responsibilities. And then again, it opened up to anyone with 26-week service. So it's really evolved over time, and it continues to evolve today. So as I say, all those sorts of different types of working can fall under the flexible working remit. So what is very different, and what we'll come on to later, is making requests for a change of working patterns, hours and locations and things like that. Right, so the key elements so far. So what we've done here on this slide is we've detailed the ones in dark type that are going to remain, and we've also detailed the ones in red type that are the ones that are going to change in April. So what we're going to do a little later is go under the bonnet of each of these red ones. So the statutory right to flexible working is obviously for employees only. At the minute, it's only for individuals with 26-week service, but from the 6th of April, that's going to be changing from day one, so a day one right. At the moment, you can only take one request or make one request every 12 months, which is now going to be changing in April to 2 within 12 months. The application process of a flexible working remains, but the impact of the change will no longer be required by the employee, which we'll delve into in a little bit as well. From the 6th of April, employees will have to be consulted with on flexible working instead of a general discussion. And then requests can be refused based on 8 reasons. So some of these reasons can include financial viability for the organization, not being able to recruit more staff, or not being able to meet the customer demand. And obviously the option for an employee to appeal the flexible outcome decision will remain as well, which is good practice, obviously, for the organization to put that into place. It's also important to remember as well that if you have any issues with these or want to raise them with us, then you can obviously get in touch. You've got our details. If you haven't, I will have a slide later on in the webinar, which I will be sending over to you just so you have our details to reach out on any flexible working queries. So as flexible working has evolved over the years, as we've seen, it does evolve quite significantly, or has evolved quite significantly. We wanted to check your understanding and thoughts on the topic. So we did send a question out initially yesterday, and we wanted to ask the questions: can employees make a flexible working request to have a morning off every week to attend a Weight Watchers class? Now, I know that sounds like an extreme example, but reasons like this do crop up frequently, and employers regularly wrestle with the facts of questions on whether employees in fact have the right to make such a request. So let's just see how many we had in response. So as you can see in red, 26% said yes, employees can make the request, and interestingly, no was a massive 74%. Interestingly, the answer would be yes, so they can absolutely make a request for a morning a week to go to Weight Watchers, or it could be other reasons as well, such as finishing early to go and walk the dog. It can be for any reason. So as I touched on earlier, it really has evolved over time. As an employer, it can feel at times a little bit frustrating because someone making a request for childcare may seem a lot more significant than someone making a request to walk the dog. But it's not our concern. It's not within our gift to be concerned with that, and we have to take each request as serious as the other. So moving on to the removal of service requirements. So from April, obviously this is changing. You won't have to have 26 weeks continuous service to have a right to make a request for flexible working, and it's going to be from day one. So to put this into context, someone can literally interview on the Friday, get offered the job, walk through the door on the Monday, and the first thing they do is to put down a letter on your desk to say they want to go part-time, which no doubt will push employers' buttons, but it will be a legal right and something we will have to deal with. So with that and looking at the realities of it, you're going to have less time to appraise how the employee's performing. And obviously you can't be flippant with that either. You can't allow that viewpoint that you've only just walked into the door to impact the way you address this. So regardless of it being day one or if someone's had 25 years service, you've got to treat them in the same way. So you need to think really carefully about evaluating a refusal of a request from a new starter because you've now been in breach of the new legislation. So one tip, if you want to avoid any surprises on the day that might be worth considering, is whether you're open with the individual in your positioning on flexible working at the recruitment stage. So there's no legal requirement to do that, but it might fit what you're trying to achieve and help set the expectations for yourself and the employee. So you could say that you want to talk about hybrid working or office working and maybe wean it into the interview if it could be an option that works for you. So, okay, another thing to bear in mind, this is going to change, obviously, that you can make double the number of requests in a rolling 12-month period. So currently, you can only make one request up until the 6th, of course. You can only make one request every rolling 12 months, and that's going to be increased into two. So it's important to note here that you might have people making requests now or before the 6th of April. So for employees who've made a request in the last 12 months, they will immediately get another request that they can make from April. So it is good to have that in the back of your mind because you might have people who are currently going through the process and will likely get someone who will ask that question. You might even want to ask that question yourself. So another big question on that as well with the new law changes is, are we going to see an increase in tribunal claims around flexible working? And on that, I think there would be that potential. It is highly likely that there will be an increase because clearly there's going to be an increase in flexible working requests. People are going to be able to make two requests over the course of the year as opposed to one. So it is good to be aware of all these facts to be ready for flexible working. So another key change in this application process, or is the application process as part of the flexible working. So right now you can talk to an employee and ask them to set out the changes that they're proposing. But with the new rules, you're not allowed to sort of push them or push the employee to justify those challenges and how they can be overcome. Therefore, this will really put the onus on your people managers and yourselves in dealing with this request. And they will really need to have a real understanding of the individual's role to allow them to understand the impact the change would have and enable them to understand whether they accept or refuse it. So there is, without doubt, more effort on a leader's part to understand the request, and if so, how they would want to refuse it and why they're refusing it based on the rationale of the application. There's obviously a question mark around that. Can you still ask the rationale for wanting the flexible change? You can't force the individual to give you the answer or force them to surrender the information. But I think most employers would probably be happy to engage in that conversation. I mean, I would. It's a two-way thing, isn't it? But I think my advice would be to ask, if you don't get an answer, do not push it because they're not entitled to give you details around the impact of that change that they're proposing. It'll be for you to understand the role and what you can do to sort of make those adjustments. So this is what we touched on earlier, our top tip, which is asking an employee to confirm whether they're making the request as a reasonable adjustment under disability laws. So why should you ask that? Because it is a slightly different process. In this case, unlike the new flexible working rules, you'll need to know the deeper rationale for the individual and for the business. So if an individual is coming to you saying, I want to make a flexible working request because, for example, they've got a serious illness and they say they need to go for an appointment every Wednesday to help them overcome this illness. They may ask to reduce hours on a Wednesday through a flexible working request. So this is a little bit different. You can by all means go through the process. However, it's actually a different one where you are discussing whether their request is an adjustment that you can reasonably oblige and agree to. So you need to consider if it is a reasonable adjustment for you as a business. It is a little bit more complicated in that you may need to get the medical evidence right to a GP or an occupational health specialist and assess their viewpoint on whether the disability is covered under the equality law. So hence you would have to consider the adjustments and consider a little bit more. So what I would say is at the start of the flexible working process, be really clear that this is for health reasons or a condition related reason, because the liability against getting this wrong is obviously significantly high. And it's really important we understand the root of the request, with it being a slightly different process. Another new element of flexible working is that you must consult with the employee. It's no longer just a discussion, it's a consultation. So if you are refusing a request for flexible working, you should be consulting with the employee from April around what the impact should be for you as an employer and for them as an employee. Have they got any other ideas, any alternatives? What might suit you both instead? It's like what you do within a redundancy consultation. So it's a two-way conversation, taking on their ideas, taking on their thoughts, evidencing that you've thought about them and as to whether they can be justified or not, and then giving them an outcome within that consultation and within that in mind. So it's a two-way dialogue between the two parties. And again, this is a new process. It obviously gives the employee that little bit of extra leverage, and it makes it a bit more difficult for employees. But again, as Robinson Grace, we're here to help to support you through that and guide you through that as well if you need that extra guidance. It doesn't mean it's a negative thing where the process is a little bit like a redundancy process. Quite often in consultations, hopefully you've had experience of them, things actually come out where you can have that open and honest dialogue and you can solve those problems. So you might find something or an alternative during the process of consultation that neither of you considered that you can agree upon. So next is the reduced deadline. So currently you've got 3 months to deal with flexible working requests from April. That's obviously reduced into 2 months, and that will include the appeal process, which is obviously a good practice to offer that. So even with the appeal option, it doesn't give you much time to complete the process. I mean, it's mid-March already. It already feels like Christmas was 2 minutes ago. So with the new time constraints, you've got to be really disciplined with your management team, your people managers, and make sure you've got those key deadlines in your calendar. Make sure you're monitoring leaders and outputs of when they're doing this as well. So there are circumstances where you can extend those time frames, whether it's where it's mutually agreed between the employer and the employee. So say, for example, you were dealing with one and they were going on an extended holiday, or the manager was ill, then you could agree to a mutually extended time frame. That is obviously reasonable. However, we do need to consider as well that there can be repercussions where there isn't that agreement in place, and there has been a case where an employer did breach a deadline with the timeline for going back on a flexible working request by 21 days, and the employee was actually awarded 1 week's pay. So you don't want to get into that monetary award situation that costs your organization when things could simply be avoided. So be really, really strict with your deadlines and your organization and really get on it. So as I said here earlier, apologies, it's quite a lot going on that slide. But I wanted to delve into the case that we discussed originally, because I do feel that it's quite interesting for you as employers. There was a bit of press about this. The claimant was Wilson and the respondent was the Financial Conduct Authority, and the employer refused a request for the individual to continue to work from home following COVID. Obviously a question that does come up quite a bit. Now, to understand this a little bit more, we've got 2 slides on the topic, and this one is during the disagreement, and the next slide will be on the tribunal stage. So firstly, we'll cover obviously the 2 ends of the spectrum in terms of the argument between the employee and the employer. So the employee said, whilst working from home, my performance has been excellent, and that's reflected in their appraisal, which is obviously a fair point. And they also said there's nothing that you require of me that cannot be done using technology. We have excellent technology here that allows for it. Again, being a fair point. A lot of people say, like us today, I'm sat in front of you on a laptop speaking to you on Teams. All these brilliant technology platforms have made it really easy for all of us to communicate remotely. Then they said, there's not a lot of meeting space in the office, and there's never been a meeting that I haven't been able to take part in virtually. And again, that's not uncommon. Many employers, companies that I've worked for before as well have reduced their office size and saved a lot of money in doing so. So these are valid points. But the employer challenged this, and this point I think is really an important one. You can view your own performance solely through your own eyes. So this individual specifically was a people manager. They were managing people who they weren't sat next to. They had colleagues and new staff that they couldn't interact with in person. And this does happen a lot where an employee will request something solely through their own eyes. So they work in a team, a business. So this is an interesting comment from the employer. There's a lot of things expected for you as a manager as well that you're not able to do from home, such as not able to meet new staff, not being visible and being present in the office or give structured or informal advice, and not even at department away days and engaging with a team and things like that. So you have both ends of the spectrum here between employee and employer, but these were challenged, and then both parties end up moving to the tribunal stage, which we'll touch on in a moment. So this is an example of where the organization has refused a flexible working request. And sometimes if you're undecided on whether to accept or refuse a request when the time comes, it is important to look at that middle ground and look at what balance you can have between the two, whether it means they come in the office once a fortnight or on a regular occasion rather than 2 days a week, as obviously that's what's requested here. So obviously the employee made the claim to go to tribunal, and on this decision, the employee said that the decision had been based on incorrect facts. But here's some direct comments from the judge himself. The employer has the right to identify weaknesses with remote working, and it's the experience of many of us who use technology that it's not well suited to a fast-paced interplay of exchanges which occurs, such as training events, rapid discussions, and there's an inability and limitation to observe and respond to non-verbal communication. And obviously that's often a point that's surfaced in organizations by employees and employers alike. That conversation does come up regularly. So this claim was dismissed and was certainly one that got a lot of attention because they don't often go this way and are often in the employee's favor. However, in this situation with a robust defense and rationale from the business, these are the types of decisions that can arise. So moving on to what you need to do. So we'll run through a few of the key points. When the April changes do come in, you need to update your current policies. You ideally need to be doing that now, and obviously we're here to support you with that. Importantly, you need to be making sure that you're fully equipped for April when the changes come into fruition from an updated policy, where we're more than happy, obviously, for you to seek guidance through us on that. All the paperwork as well around making requests for flexible work, agreeing to it, refusing it, etc., making sure you've got all the documents in place for that. Training the managers on the new process. Again, with these slides, happy to share you with them. We do have some additional collateral we can send over to you as well, and obviously send over the recording of this to give your people managers some guidance. Prepare for more requests being made as well. Have you got management time in mind for them to be aware that it is going to take more time? You're going to need to keep that in the forefront of your mind as well. As I touched on earlier, knowledge of the roles within your organization, so you have that understanding of the background of the role and its ability to flex if you're going to accept or refuse it. And then the employee might not be forthcoming on how the change will impact their role. So you need to make sure that all the refusals are based on correct facts, which obviously takes us back to that tribunal situation as well. So as far as we're concerned at Robinson Grace, obviously as you retained, you do receive free policies, templates, letters, unlimited phone line support from us, as well as our qualified HR consultants are available Monday to Friday. So if you are in a little bit of a sticky situation on flexible working requests, we can give advice and guidance and help you through them. Obviously, our contact details are on the screen. You should already have these, I know, but happy to swing these slides over to you to share with your team as well if any questions do come up on flexible working or anything else additional to that as well that get raised outside of this webinar. So that's all from me for now. Hopefully it wasn't too much of a fleeting visit through flexible working, and it is a bit helpful. We can take some questions now. I do have Debbie, our other HR consultant, on the line that can also support with them. Do any of you have any questions about what you've heard so far?
I'm working for a building-based organisation which currently has a hybrid working practice in place, where people are able to work from home for a certain number of days per week, and it isn't currently working. And what we said to the team is that we are going to review it, and we'll be asking people to come into the office more frequently from April. But actually, listening to this, that's really unfortunate timing, isn't it? Because we're going to be bringing something in for the whole organisation at a time that each individual person can come back with their own kind of view on it. So are we better off to kind of make our change before April, like in the next couple of weeks?
Debbie, do you want to?
I suppose what I'm trying to understand is, what's the basis of this hybrid policy? Was it introduced purely in the COVID period as a temporary solution? Was it a permanent change to contracts? What was the basis of it?
It doesn't appear in contracts, and actually it's not in the handbook. It's an informal arrangement which the staff are currently benefiting from.
So it's not a formal change to contract, so you could go back to the contractual arrangements that you have in place for hybrid working, or for traditionally working in the office arrangements, because that's the basis of the contract. What you might find is you get some appeals on the basis of the request to appeals from removal of that hybrid working policy, and that could be in the basis of flexible working requests, which those with service could do now. They wouldn't need to wait till April. Those with more than 6 months service could do now. But it would mean that anyone from day one would be able to make that request from April. So I would say make some inroad on it now, but respect that you may well get requests for flexible working requests, and that may be to continue hybrid working arrangements for an individual, or some form of hybrid working, which could be the things that Bob identified earlier, the compressed hours, for example, or whatever. So the basis of the contractual relationship is that they are based in the office, and for a period of time you've had an informal hybrid working arrangements. But what you're doing now is going back to that original contractual terms. The best way to do it is always with agreement.
Sure. Okay, great. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your time, guys. Appreciate you jumping on. If you do have any questions, obviously you've got our details. You can get in touch, and I will get the slides and things over to you as well. But thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll hopefully catch you on the next session we do have. I've just realised I've taken the slides off now. I do apologies, but we do have a bank holiday calculation webinar on the 21st of March. So you'll be seeing some bits and pieces about that on our social media platforms. So please jump on for that as well, which Louise will be presenting to you as well. But thank you very much for your time today. Thank you.